welcome to another session of TAO's Resiliency series with Kimberly Howard, Program Manager of Portland General Electric's Project Zero. I will say PGE from here on out, it's less of a mouthful. I'm Kara Toronto. For those of you whom I have not met, I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at TAO. And back in early 2020, in the before times, TAO created our Resiliency series as a way for members of our community to hear directly from elected officials and key stakeholders about issues related to the resiliency of our region. We've continued to have this conversation well into 2021 and expanded beyond policymakers to thought leaders and industry experts. We're having conversations about innovative programs that are designed to create significant impact as we aspire to have the most inclusive innovation ecosystem in the country. So we will share this conversation as on-demand content on our YouTube channel and in Mobilize, our online member engagement platform. If you have any questions about joining Mobilize or joining TAO, please reach out to membership@techoregon.org. If you have key takeaways from this conversation as you listen to it, please share them with us on social media. We appreciate all the social support, and you can see where to find us on this current slide. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Kimberly Howard, who I get to work with in a variety of STEM initiatives. So this is actually really fun for me. I only know her in one dimension of her work life. So we're going to explore a little bit more. So thanks for joining us today, Kimberly.
It is great to be here. Thanks, Kara and TAO for inviting me into this conversation. I look forward to chatting with you today.
Well, we are glad you're here, and I'm going to have you start us off by telling us a little bit about yourself and your background and what got you into the role you are in today.
So I am an artist, actually, by training, a performing artist. I have a Master of Fine Arts degree in theater with an emphasis in acting from Columbia University. And as you know, education is key. And so even though I am an actor, Columbia University is on that piece of paper. So a master's from Columbia University has opened many doors. I went from teaching as an associate or assistant professor at a small college in Walla Walla, Washington, to moving to Portland and doing a variety of different things from hospitality all the way to state arts advocacy and fund development. And in between was an arts manager, I guess we would call it, in arts management, and ran an arts organization. And all along the way, just continued to deepen my work in community engagement and in strategy. And so when an opportunity came to work for Portland General Electric and the PGE Foundation, I applied and was really excited to come to work for their then called Corporate Social Responsibility team. And now we've been recently renamed Community Impact. And so that is my background. And about 2 years ago, we were, my boss and I, Craig Arnson, were at a conference for citizens, corporate citizens professionals. And, you know, these big companies like FedEx and UPS and Patagonia, right, that have these huge corporate social responsibility campaigns. And we were super excited and inspired by a marketing professional who talked about good is the new cool, and how companies that really sort of lived and breathed and messaged their corporate purpose were doing great things in the world. And we realized, wait, PGE is already doing great things, but nobody knows about it. Or I shouldn't say that, you know, but we were known in the community through environmental stewardship. We're known as supporters of STEM education. But how could we bring all of that together and really focus it? And so I was lucky enough to be able to create the work that I want to do and add value to the company and to the community at the same time. So that's kind of how I got here to PGE and to program managing PGE Project Zero.
I love that. And that's actually our next question. So tell us a little bit about PGE Project Zero. What's the mission of the project? What inspired its creation? And what are you trying to achieve?
So our mission and our vision is empowering the next generation to create cleaner, greener, more equitable communities. And as I said, we've already had a long history at PGE and the PGE Foundation of supporting education. We recognize that STEM science, technology, engineering, math, and creative expression are really the ways in which the next generation are going to find creative solutions to the climate disruption, creative solutions to other issues we have as humanity, and moving us forward into, into our future. And so really investing in those young adults to find those solutions meant that we needed to focus in on what it was that they wanted. And around the time we got inspired about the good being the new cool, the Portland Public Schools students walked out. They did a walkout because they had been demanding climate curriculum and they hadn't gotten it. So they took a strike. And then a few months later, Greta led us all in a global climate strike. And it became very obvious that the youth voice, the young adult voice, was really going to lead us to our future. And that was going to be the major way that we would find solutions to the climate disruption. So we started to lean into that and then lean into what our assets were as a company. And we had long been having employees engaged in a variety of different volunteer activities, including planting trees and removing invasive or non-native plants from places that they shouldn't be, really doing habitat restoration and litter cleanup. But we were also deeply involved in STEM education and showing up for students and for teachers in person, in classrooms, to add value to their curriculum. So looking at all of that, and then also looking at our long-standing commitment to workforce development, Project Zero created sort of three elements. We created an education part, a workforce development or a green jobs internship program specifically, and a series of curated environmental stewardship projects to really round out what Project Zero is. And I would say what inspired us is the students, and the youth voice really inspired us to want to do something to be able to empower, give them the mic, if you will. I think some of them actually asked for that when they went in to meet with the mayor of the city of Portland. Just stop getting in our way, they said. Just give us the mic and let us get this done. So this is PGE and the PGE Foundation's way of saying, okay, how can we be partners at the table with the resources that we have?
I love this for so many reasons. Like, you're not dictating to the community how you're going to be involved. You're letting the community influence that. I like what you said about utilizing existing assets and saying, hey, we've always been doing this work, but let's reframe it. And then what I love the most as a workforce person and a STEM champion as well is I think utilities are really interesting because it is the entire spectrum of science, technology, engineering, and math. And I think sometimes as technologists that live in this like B2B SaaS world, you forget that it is an encompassing terminology for a reason. And I think even the folks that are out on the line crews, making sure that we have power, they have engineering components of their job. And so then you bring in the environmental piece. I mean, it's really holistic. And so that's where I'm going with this next question. So I know you're a STEM champion. I did not know that you were an actor. So really you probably are more of a STEAM champion because you mentioned creative expression. So can you share your thoughts on how STEAM careers create a more equitable community?
Yes, and this is something that really has come to me over time. We've talked a lot about equity in STEM, providing access, but it started to come to me that STEM actually is a pathway to equitable outcomes. When you think about those high wage, high demand jobs, we use that term a lot in industry and in business, those jobs really are a pathway to many students coming out of navigating poverty. But even if they are middle income students, it is still a pathway to wealth creation. And we know that wealth creation comes from land ownership, property ownership. We know that wealth creation comes from owning your own business, right? As my dad used to say, nobody gets wealthy by working. It's really the people that start a business. It's somebody that owns property that can begin to develop wealth over time that they can then pass to the next generation. And those STEM careers, especially in technology, but also in science, whether it's research or medicine, any of the healthcare professions, engineering definitely, and then math. We were just talking earlier, everyone, about data analytics and a growing field within the business community. Yes, and it's completely math driven and code driven. So those are careers that young people in our K-12 system and even our higher ed system need to recognize as opportunities to lead to the jobs that will help them both sustain their families, but also create the wealth for the next generation. And when we look at the professions, right, or the people who are in those professions, they don't always look like you and me, right? There's not a lot of women, although that is changing, and there's not a lot of people or students of color that are, and there are statistics or data that support that, but we would like to change that, and we'd like to see that changed. So being able to say to a young person, if you develop your STEM skills, if you follow a career pathway into a STEM career, you are going to increase your earnability over time. What you are able to earn in your work life when 30, 40 years of working is going to be much higher in a STEM career. And the creative expression part of it is important because that's the human connection, right? I like to talk a lot at PGE about how are we making this human-centered. And those of us that have studied the arts, and actually many math professionals are also musicians. Not sure what that connection is. But have you noticed that?
Yeah. I know this because in my first iteration of my career, I worked for a software engineering company. And, like you pointed out, there were no women. And all the guys were in a band, and I could not understand like what the tie-in was, but over the 20-ish years that I've been in tech, like it is a very common thing to see. But if you think about it, music is very mathematically driven.
Yes, absolutely. And then you have, these engineering incubators like at Stanford where design thinking was born, and it's really human-centered design. And I used to say that that STEM is about solving problems on behalf of humanity, and creative expression is understanding humanity. And you can't have one without the other, right? If you're going to solve a problem on behalf of humanity, then you need to understand it. So whatever way in which you engage in creative expression, whether that's writing or music or sculpture or drawing, that's a way into understanding us as human beings. But those STEM professions are really going to lead to future wealth.
Well, I love that. And what I really appreciate is through some of the work that we do from an advocacy standpoint, we know how many STEM jobs there are in the state, or in particular, how many tech jobs. When you look at that, less than 50% are what you would consider techie. It's less than 50% is software development. So over 50% is everything else that is in that ecosystem, whether it's social responsibility, whether it's marketing. And so I think it's an interesting narrative right now to go beyond I'm going to work in this image, this picture of what I have, because it's so much broader than that. And I think you've sort of talked a little bit about this, but I'm curious, like beyond the philanthropic work, how is PGE incorporating their support of diversity, equity, and inclusion from that STEM lens, like into today's workforce beyond just their philanthropic investment? Like, what have you seen over the last couple of years that you've been involved in terms of how the workforce is changing?
Well, I'll start by speaking of it myopically from the perspective of Project Zero and how we grew and designed and developed the internship program of Project Zero, but then also on the aggregate, sort of PGE just sort of changing our culture. Maybe actually I'll start from the bigger picture. So PGE as a company for probably 30 plus years has been working in the diversity and inclusion space. The Diversity Summit that used to happen every other year was sponsored, not even sponsored, we actually presented or produced it as a company. In the last year, 2 years ago, we sort of passed that over to Partners in Diversity, but we continue to be the major sponsor of that Diversity Summit. This year, they called it Northwest Equity Summit and happened virtually. As a company, then we are looking at sort of what is our company culture and how is it inclusive? How are the voices of the community that we represent and the customers that we are, how are those included, not just included, but represented in the decision making that happens at Portland General Electric? And so internally, there's been a lot of work on developing talent from within, both in the BIPOC community, Black, Indigenous, people of color, as well as leadership with women into managerial and supervisory roles within the company. And then there's been look at how are we recruiting for the trades and our crafts jobs within the company as well, and working with organizations like POIC, Constructing Hope, that are in the women's tradeswomen. Those are sort of organizations that are preparing individuals, BIPOC and women individuals, for careers in the trades, and partnering with them to begin to fill our own pathway to those jobs within PGE. PGE Project Zero's internship program grew out of that commitment. We were looking for ways in which to really grow workforce development on behalf of the community and make a community impact. And what we saw as a big gap was that I'm gonna call it a sweet spot. The opportunity youth, I think, is what a lot of people call 16 to 24-year-olds who are no longer in school, but they're not employed or they're underemployed. And so we looked at the older range of that, the 20 to 24-year-olds who should in fact be somewhere on their career spectrum at the entry-level jobs or in some sort of training or apprentice program, or even in their first few years of college or post-secondary degree attainment. And there's a huge population that is not. And so working again with some of our community partners like Outside In, New Avenues for Youth, looking at who are those young adults who have had some form of workforce training already, and are ready, for want of a better term, to finish themselves or get themselves ready for that next step into an entry-level career track job that doesn't require them to have a 4-year or 2-year degree. And so we got 8 partners around the table in the youth development, workforce, and environmental services realm and environmental justice realm around the table. And we worked together as a collaborative to design a 6-month program that would recruit and serve 10 interns at a time for 6 months that would be paid by the PGE Foundation for work-based learning. And you see it's small, right? It seems like, wow, that's just so incremental. It's only 10, but we see this as an opportunity potentially to scale, that it's a program that other employers could say, wow, I could do something like that. And the key was, and this is where it comes back to diversity, equity, inclusion. There was 2 things. One was that a commitment that 50% of the young adults that we recruited to the program would be representative of BIPOC communities. But the other commitment was that we would be paying an intern to work for a community organization. So they're working for PGE, they're working for Verde, they're working for Friends of Trees, they're working last year for the Blueprint Foundation. They're working for Forest Park Conservancy. And so those organizations that are doing their own work, and in some cases are culturally specific organizations, now have added capacity that they're not having to pay for. And in addition to that, the PGE Portland General Electric is paying to add capacity to their organizations to be supervisors. So it is building capacity for the nonprofit. It's also giving money for work-based learning to the young adult. And in both cases, there's a focus on those being BIPOC communities. That's a long answer.
No, but it's so great. Like, I love that you said 10 doesn't seem like a lot, but it does. So like that first 10 then become the foundation for the next 10. And 10 years from now, there's a decade's worth of folks that come from the BIPOC community in these careers that have been predominantly white. And like, that is how you create that flywheel. And I think it's compelling because I have this conversation a lot with companies that are like, we want to make a change from an equity and inclusion standpoint, but everyone is so concerned about their quarterly earnings. And I think that's where a utility has an interesting opportunity to help change that narrative because they can think longer term. And that's a cool place to be. Okay, we're never going to get through all the questions I came up with. So let's go. Okay, I'm going to like go with that vein. Do you see other utilities based on what you're doing, whether it's in Portland, Oregon, or nationally, stepping up and running similar initiatives? Or would you all say that PGE and the PGE Foundation and Project Zero are really industry leaders?
We are on this particular, so Project Zero overall, I think is, you know, if you include the education and the climate curriculum development with PPS, and if you include the environmental stewardship projects, I think that other utilities are doing a work in a similar vein. I just was on a leadership call with women from utilities all over the country, and one, you know, the clean energy future that we talk about here in the metro area and in Oregon is definitely a conversation that's happening nationwide, and how we're going to get to that clean energy future through investments in education and through workforce is not unusual. What we've done with the internship program and what we are doing with Portland Public Schools, I think that is unique is partnership. A lot of people are calling it trust-based philanthropy, where instead of just bringing money to the table and making an investment, we're also bringing time and resources and consulting, convening, and sort of shared practices and shared learnings to the table as well across all of the partners. As you said earlier, we're not just sort of saying this is what everyone's going to do, but instead we're asking the community what it is that needs to be done, and then working together. So I think that part of it is unique. And this internship program, we did a lot of research around the country in terms of work-based learning and work development programs. And what we found was that there were a lot of workforce development programs. And I think it's something like 12, I don't want to get the number wrong, but it is in the trillions. It's a big number that we spend every year for workforce development nationwide. But what we're finding is there's just a gap. There's a moment in time where for companies, as you said, whether it's risk aversion or it's just not profitable to hire somebody that's right out of high school, or somebody that hasn't had an extensive training program, or more realistically, that hasn't had at least 3 to 5 years of experience on the job, is hard to do. And we've talked a lot in many of the meetings that you and I have been in and around STEM, about how are we developing our workforce that is already on the job. And we need to be able to do that in order for us to provide those entry-level positions as an industry. And I think that is what we're doing a little bit differently, because this 6 months, while it's not working for PGE, they're learning a lot of transferable skills. And then at the end of their 6 months, PGE actually hired 2 of the interns, along with many of our, Columbia Land Trust also hired one of our interns as well. And we have other employers like City of Roses Disposal and Recycling and Imagine Energy, the solar installer company, in the waiting. They're waiting for this next class to graduate to see if there's potential graduates that they could also employ. So by having this 6 months, what our hope is, and our goal, I should say, hope makes it sound too woo-woo. Our goal is that they will be ready for that entry-level position, and that the employers that hire them will recognize that the 6 months that they spent really gives them a leg up and provides that on-ramp to working at their company.
I love that. And I think that really kind of, it sort of leads into this next question, because you talk about that gap. You and I talk about it all the time, supply versus demand. Every entry-level job is like, yeah, I want you to be entry-level, but I need you to also have 3 to 5 years of experience. And it's like, how do you do that? And so I know I've seen industry doing some interesting things, but what do you think is industry's role in developing and supporting this inclusive innovation economy?
Oh, I think probably the best answer, and it comes from our friends at the HEC, the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, and within the HEC, the Oregon Youth Corps and other workforce development opportunities, and that is youth employment. I think the best way that we can close that gap is to provide work-based learning experiences, whether we call them internships or fellowships or apprenticeships, that really give that young person that experience that we want them to have. And so if we can't call them a full-time employee at the right out of the gate, we can at least give them the opportunity to learn on the job. And so when that full-time position comes available, they're the first people that we look at and say, we know that they know our company, they know the work that's being done, and they've been trained by us to do this work. I think that's the best thing. So if all of us can sort of look at what are those opportunities that we can provide for work-based learning experiences and for youth employment, then and provide those opportunities within reason or within our ability to do it, right? There's OSHA laws, there's BOLI laws and policies, but there are ways to provide those experiences that are safe and within policy realm to do so.
It's almost like industry reframes their internal career path to have a pre-career path. And like,
yes,
how would someone get here? Remove the barrier of a 4-year degree and like really think about what that could look like. So, okay, that's good. That's good input. We can use that. And I have a call with the heck later today. So I appreciate that insight. Okay. Last thing before we stop this recording and I let you go, which makes me sad. How can people support the work that you're doing?
Well, that's a great question. And I thought about that. And then I wrote down, I don't remember my notebook is, I wrote down probably the same thing that I just said. I think supporting the work is supporting the young adults and the youth that we are supporting in whatever way that your organization can. Think about the assets that you have as a company, whether you are a small startup or a tech company that's further along, and really think about so what is it that we have to offer? And most likely what you have to offer is your employees and those subject matter experts or content experts that can engage with the next generation in ways in which they can see mentorship, they can see themselves represented in the workforce, future workforce, and they can understand the variety of different ways in which they can save the world or solve the world's problems through a STEM degree or a STEM pathway, whether it be again, through the trades or through a college degree or associate's degree, your assets that you can bring as a company are going to be the best way to support this work for the community.
I think that's so great too. So we'll end it with this because I hear all the time, we can't find people, we can't find people. And so that maybe is part of the response. Well, have you considered like the pre-pathway into your organization and what would an investment on that end look like versus trying to find somebody that's much harder to staff with tons of experience? Like, why not grow that yourself? That's so insightful.
Absolutely. And then, that just made me think of the last thing I would say. And this is, we talked early on about my arts background and centering the human experience. I would say that for Project Zero, centering the diversity, equity, and inclusion work or centering equity has been key. When you think about what you can do for this work, what is the work that you as a company are doing on your equity journey so that you're providing an inclusive environment for those young adults as they come into their first career path or pre-career pathway, so that they feel that their voices are included and that they see themselves represented, and that they also feel that sense of belonging in your company. That's really key, because sometimes it's great, we get everybody on board and they're starting the program or they're starting the work, but then they don't have a sense of belonging and the company isn't quite sure how to do that. And so everybody sort of stumbles and then the young person fails. Yeah. Or doesn't, fails fast, right? As we say in the tech industry, I know. But they move on and they look for somewhere else to belong. And so how do we do the hard work of making everybody feel a sense of belonging when they come to work for our companies?
Well, I love that. PGE is lucky to have you. Our community is very lucky to have you. I feel fortunate to have you as a colleague in this work, and I really appreciate you giving us this time this morning. Thank you for sharing what we're doing. I know that our members will be really interested in this, and I appreciate that we've gone from social impact to STEM champion to workforce development, and finally tied it all back with belonging. So I hope you have a really great day, Kimberly, and thank you again for your time.
Thank you so much, Kara. It's been a pleasure talking with you.